All right, Trouble, say good morning. I'm sorry that we lost 6 minutes this morning. My apologies. So let's at least salvage a few minutes. So we left off with yesterday. We're beginning today, I should say, Os Yud. Os Yud, I sent it out on the chat. Hopefully you've seen it. So Reb Tzadok writes this also, and I will say here he's transitioning a little bit of to a little bit of a different discussion, and he writes as follows: Kol binyan limudo yihye al hamikra shetziva Hashem. This is really quite fascinating. He says, literally again, the entire learning of a person, right? The entire learning of a person should be built on the pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us. So what does this mean? If you take a look in the Be'uri HaChasidus, so if you take a look again on the commentary section on the bottom, you will find that Reb Tzadok writes as follows. He says, "Mitchilas hashas ramzu lanu chazal, shekol binyan limudo shel adam yeh miyusad al hanikra, hapasuk shemisocho mevaer, shetziva Hashem al osa mitzvah shedanim ba, o mispareshes b'mishno b'gimara." So this is incredible. He says, when a person goes ahead and does a mitzvah, so that mitzvah obviously comes from a pasuk, right? That mitzvah comes from a particular verse. So Reb Tzadok seems to be suggesting something very interesting, that when a person goes ahead and is learning something, binyan limudo shel adam, so whether a person's learning or a person's performing a mitzvah, in the moment that he's learning or that he's performing, ultimately, again, he should have in mind the pasuk, the verse that serves as the foundation for what it is that he's doing. And Reb Tzadok goes on. I'm going to continue to read in the Be'ori HaChasidus section. And he says, Upasuk zeh, yihye nochach inov b'chol eis, shedan b'prate mitzvah zu. And he should imagine this pasuk in front of him the entire time that he is involved in this particular mitzvah. V'hainu, sheyiskar ki al zeh hu dan be'eis limudo. So this is actually quite amazing. Reb Tzadok is highlighting this concept that when I'm learning or when I'm performing a mitzvah, that I should have the pasuk that is generating the obligation for performance or for learning in front of my eyes. In front of my eyes. That I should go ahead and literally be imagining this in front of me. So that a person ultimately, again, should be able to go ahead and see what it is that he's doing right in front of his eyes. He says, "Va'al zeh," we'll see what this means in just a moment. "Va'al zeh ramaz Rabbi Huda Nasi b'chiburo berosh hamishnayis v'pasach beloshon me'imasai ubazeh atana Christ." So we'll say, well, actually, you know what we'll do is we'll stop over here for today, or only because this is going to be a bit more involved as you go on. But just suffice it to say as follows. What Reb Tzadok is highlighting is really something dramatically amazing, which is that a lot of times when we engage in our Yiddishkeit, so we become very focused on the details, which of course is what we're supposed to do. So right, you become focused on the mechanistic details. We even sometimes become focused a little bit on the spiritual details, which is incredible. But sometimes what we lose sight is that at the end of the day, what I'm doing because the Ribono Shel Olam asked me to do it. And I was about to say, how many times does it happen that sometimes I learn Torah or I do mitzvahs and I don't even think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? I know that sounds strange because that's what I do, but yet it happens all of the time where essentially things that I do because I'm used to doing them, because it's part of my habit, it's part of my daily schedule, and I do it, and I'm even proficient in it, but I don't necessarily think about the Ribono Shel Olam. I don't necessarily think about the Ribono Shel Olam. And says Reb Tzadok that when you go ahead and you do a mitzvah, or you go ahead and you learn, to make sure to visualize in front of you the pasuk that is generating the mitzvah, the pasuk that is generating the limud. Because then when you think about the pasuk, where does that pasuk come from? That pasuk comes from the Torah. And where does the Torah Kedosha come from? We just saw the whole sugya. It comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And by visualizing the pasuk that generates the obligation the concept that I'm learning about, or that generates the mitzvah that I'm engaged in, I remember not just to be proficient in the performance of the mitzvah, the performance of the limud, but I remember that ultimately it's connecting me to the Ribono Shel Olam. So we'll have to stop over here. Again, my apologies for the 6-minute delay, but Emir Hashem will finish Sif Yud Emir Hashem on Monday. Shukayach, everyone. All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning, good morning. We have a beautiful parak ahead of us today, new parak ahead of us today. Want to begin by thanking the sponsors of our Shir Talmud Torah sponsors, Justin and Abigail Rosemore, for dedicating all of the Shiur ben Droshos this month in memory of their beloved son, Kobi Chaim Yaakov David ben Zichron Levracha ben Yosef Tzadok. Our monthly Shir sponsor, Alan and Sue Meirowitz and family, Jason, Deborah, Justin, Rebecca, Mindy, Simcha, and all of the grandchildren in the merit of a Refuah Shalema for Shulamis Tova Bas Mindel. And we have a day of learning sponsor, the Ringo, Ram, Fine, and Harwitz families, for dedicating the Shiurim and Drushas today in memory of their father and grandfather, Nachum ben Shlomo Meir. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Shem will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. And I will say with that, let us begin. So brand new parak that we are starting today. Today's daf is Tzadik Aleph 91, and we are picking up Emir Hashem on daf Tzadik Amud Beis 90b. We are picking up on 90b. So the Gemara says, as the Mishnah says as well. So we'll say, interestingly enough, it really is fascinating to see how much of Masechta Shabbos the Masechta is dedicated to Hotzah. Right? Again, and you're going to see right now, we're continuing in this discussion about transferring items from one domain to another, what's considered to be significant, what's insignificant, and it's amazing. Just also so you could see, there's an incredible hashkafa in this. What's the hashkafa? Why so much time spent on Hotzah? Because I will say, so much of life is about getting from point A to point B. Right? So much of life is getting from your Reshus HaYachid to the Reshus HaRabim, from your Reshus HaRabim to Reshus HaYachid, to advancing yourself to get from one point to the next. Isn't that what all of life is about? And therefore, perhaps again, that's the musar in so much of the Masechta as well. So we go weiter. Hamatzniya l'zera. So we'll say, remember again, continue. We've actually seen this Mishnah quoted in different contexts a bit earlier. Sahamatzniya l'zera. So we'll say, so if somebody goes ahead and puts away a certain amount, now Rashi points out that it's kol shehu. A person goes ahead and puts away even a minute amount of seed for the point of ultimately sowing it, for the point of planting it. That's hamatzniya l'zera, or ula dugma. So we'll say, so dugma, remember again, refers to the fact that a person puts away a small amount of herbs in order to go ahead and, let's say, dye a small amount of fabric that would often serve as a simple patch to be able to show people different dye colors, or l'refuah, or I will say a person stores away a certain amount of something, ultimately again for medicinal purposes. Now the common denominator in all of these cases of l'zera, l'dugma, l'refuah is that you're storing away very small amounts of an item, much smaller than the normative shear for this type of item. V'hotzio b'Shabbos, and ultimately again a person goes ahead and brings it out on Shabbos. So what's the halacha? Chayiv. Ultimately a person is chayiv b'chol shehu. A person is chayiv ultimately again for going ahead and carrying out any amount. Now what's the logic over here? So Rashi says, first Rashi in the parak, Doha achshevei. So I'll say, so this is obvious, we know this already, that by virtue of the fact that you stored it, that means that for you, this is an important amount. And even though, again, objectively, you are storing an insignificant amount, but because for you this is significant, because for you this is a meaningful amount, therefore halacha l'maisa, if you were to take it out on Shabbos, you would be chayiv for hotzah. So it's like a really, in and of itself, an incredible and novel ruling. We've spent all of this time kind of creating objective amounts for hotzah, and now the Mishnah introduces us to the concept that halacha lemaisa, if you store it, it's significant for you. And if it's significant for you, then halacha lemaisa, you would be chayiv if you were to go ahead and transfer that amount. So the Gemara goes right there. V'chol adam ein chayiv alav ela kishiuro. But every other person ultimately will only be chayiv if they go ahead and transfer out the normative shear. So we'll say, so let's say, for example, for argument's sake, just to give, let's say the shear for most food items is a grogeres, the amount of a dried fig. So that's the shear you have for otzah. Let's say I happen to store a half a dried figs amount because I use that for medicinal purposes. Okay, so the halacha is, for me, if I carry out that amount, I'm going to be chayiv. Why? Because since I stored it, it's chashiv, and because it's chashiv, I'm chayiv for otzah. But if you were to take that amount from me and take it out, well, actually, we'll see that case. But but for you, the shear is still, if you don't store this type of food item for medicinal purposes, for you the shear will still be a grogeres, a figs amount. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Chazer v'echniso, eno chayiv ela kishir. So we'll see, this is actually a very interesting case. Chazer v'echniso, look at Rashi. He says, Chazer v'echniso, zesh etznia pachos mikashir, v'hotzi im chazer v'nimlach shel l'zara v'echniso. We'll say, watch this case. Let's say I stored one seed. Let's assume for a moment that one seed by itself is insignificant. But since I stored it, it's significant. Because the assumption is, since I stored it, I plan to plant it. I take it out. From Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, I did an act of Otzah. Now it's in Rosh Hashanah. I decide, you know what, I'm not planting it. So I bring it back inside my house. So as I said, the novel ruling over here is that what? That halacha l'maisa, now that I decided not to plant it, therefore, again, the one seed no longer is a chashiv shear, because once I decide not to plant it, essentially I revert back to the normative constructs of hotzah. And for the normative constructs of hotzah, one seed is not significant. So we'll see the novelty in this ruling in this Gemara. So therefore, we'll say essentially halacha l'maisa, three halachas. Number one, if you store it, it becomes significant, and therefore you're chayiv for otzah, even if it is a very small amount. Number two, ultimately, again, just because I store it, it only makes it chashiv for me. Someone else will only be chayiv if they carry out the normal hotzah amount. And halacha number three, if I take the item out, right? And then once it's out, once it's in Shurab, let's say I change my mind, I'm not going to use it for my intended purpose, and I carry it back in, once I decide not to use it for the purpose for which I stored it, the shear of the item will be the normative shear and not my subjective shear. So we'll say, so just illustrating, then we have to go on, just illustrating that last part. For example, if I store one seed, so if I store it, that makes it significant. Therefore, again, if I carry it out from my house into Rosh Hashanah, then what? Then halacha l'maisa, I'm chayiv. I've done an act of hotzah with a significant amount. But let's say now it's Rosh Hashanah, I say, you know what? I'm not storing it. I'm not planting it. So I carry it back in. I won't be chayiv for hotzah. Why? Because let's assume for a moment that one seed is not the requisite shear, and since my intention has changed, this one seed is no longer significant for me. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, I will not be chayiv for otzah. So we'll say that the novelty is the same item when you took it from your home into Rosh Hashanah, which was chayiv for otzah. If now your mindset changes from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, you won't be chayiv for otzah. Again, we'll see that in the Gemara. So it says the Gemara, we'll say, why is there a need to go ahead and begin the Mishnah as saying one who stores away? Let the Mishnah just say, Hamotzi lezera ula dugma ula rafua chayiv b'chol shu. But we'll say, all the Mishnah really needs to say is like this. It doesn't need to say, I stored it. What it needs to say is, a person who goes in and takes out enough seed to plant, or enough herbs to go ahead and to color a sample patch, or enough item that you have for a food. In other words, if I have these items and my intention is to use it for these purposes, that creates a chashivos. Whether I store it or not is really insignificant. So Amar Abaye, Hachama Eskina, what's the case? So we'll say this is fascinating. Kigon she'etzniu v'shachach lama hitzniu. So we'll say, what's the case? I put these items away. Or I stored them, but I don't remember for what purpose I stored them. And therefore what? V'hashta kamapik leistama. And now I'm carrying it out on Shabbos without any specific intent. So watch this, top of Tzadik Aleph. Ma'odatema, what would you have thought? Batule batla machshavto. I might have thought that since now I don't have any explicit, intention for how I'm going to use this item. Therefore, again, batla daita eitzal kol adam. My specific intent should ultimately be bottled to general intent. And therefore, since halacha lamaisa, I am carrying out less than the amount of what would be a normative shear, I should not be chayiv. Kamash malan, kol ha'oseh al das rishona hu oseh. Therefore, Kamash malan, the Gemara says, no, what that Mishnah is teaching me is, if you stored it, that means it's significant for you. And if it's significant for you, that means you'll be chayiv for hotzah. And the novelty is, even if you forgot the reason why you stored it, since you stored it, that makes it chashav for you, and therefore, ultimately, again, if you carry it out, you'll be chayiv on Shabbos. Now, of course, if you change your das, meaning if you say, that item, even though I did store it, it no longer has any significance for me, then einachinami, you would not be chayiv hotzah for such a small amount. But remember, that's the specific case. The case over here is, I stored it, I don't remember why I stored it. I have no specific intent to say that it's insignificant. I carry it out. In that case, what the Mishnah is teaching me is that my original das, my original intent, which ultimately propelled me to store this item, which means my original intent that said that this small amount is chashiv, remains intact unless replaced by another explicit and specific intent. And therefore, if I carry it out, halacha l'maisa, I will be chayiv. Pretty incredible. Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel, mechayiv hoyer Rabbi Meir af b'motzi chita achas l'zriya. So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel said that Rabbi Meir would say that you're chayiv even if you go ahead and you carry out one kernel of wheat. One kernel of wheat. I pshita, says the Gemara, isn't that obvious, pshita? Kol shutinan. Also, at the end of the day, the Mishnah said that you could be chayiv for otzah for any specific amount. To which the Gemara says, "Ma'u detema." What would you have thought? Kol shehu la'afuke migro geres uli olam adiika kazayis. So I will say it's interesting. The Gemara says, I would have really thought that lamais at the end of the day, when the Mishnah says that you're chayiv for kol shehu doesn't really mean kol shehu. Doesn't really mean kol shehu. Rather, I will say, what does kol shehu mean? Kol shehu means, Kol shehu means a amount smaller than a grogeres, right? An amount smaller than the volume of a dried fig. But halacha l'maisa, at least a kizayis. In other words, I might have thought if you carry out anything doesn't mean anything, because there still has to be some level of a requisite shear. So you don't need the amount of a grogeres, which is normally the amount you need for food items. Rather, you only need a kizayis. Kamash molan, that's not the case. Kamash molan said that halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah is introducing me to the idea that literally I could carry out the smallest amount, even a one stalk of wheat or one kernel of wheat. And again, if for me this is chashiv, this is important, meaning I have a use for this, then einachinami, I will be chayiv for otzah. Maskif Rabbi Yitzchak b'rei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yitzchak, son Rabbi Yehuda, raises a kasha. Elamiato chishev lahotzi kol beiso. Hachanami lo mechayiv ad demafik lekule. So we'll say, so now I have a question. Let's go to the other extreme of this. So what you're telling me now is that my das, my specific intent, ultimately goes ahead and determines whether or not something is chashiv, important, and therefore will dictate whether or not I am chayiv because of hotzah. So therefore, again, remember, what did we just say? If I have a specific use for one kernel of wheat, right, then halacha l'maisa, so for me that's chashiv. If I carry out one kernel of wheat, I'll be chayiv for hotzah on Shabbos. An incredibly novel ruling. Well, let's go on the flip side. Let's say I say to myself, you know what? My intention is to go ahead and carry out everything from my house at once. I want to do some spring cleaning on Shabbos, so I decide I'm carrying everything out of my house at once. And that's my intention. My intention is I'm clearing out everything from my house. So you're going to tell me now that because my intention is to carry out everything from my house, that I'll only be chayiv for hotza'ah once I carry everything out? Once I carry literally everything, but if I carry one thing, two things, three things, five things, I'm not chayiv? So we'll say, to which the Gemara says, no. Hasam batla daita itzakal adam. It's different. See, Rabbi say there does come a certain point in time where your das is so out of the norm that literally we don't recognize it as a valid das, but rather we will go ahead and we will say that your das is batal to everyone else. So we'll say, see here what we're saying over here, meaning to say that one stalk of wheat is chashuv, okay, even though lemaisa, for most people that will not be true, but if I could demonstrate the reason why it's chashuv, I use it for medicinal purposes, or there's something else. So if there's a reason, okay. But lemaisa, if your das is a bit absurd, right? If your das is, I'm clearing everything out of my house, moving every last item from my house, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, and that's what I want to do, and that's considered chashuv and nothing less. Already, again, that's absurd. That's absurd. And therefore, batla daita itzal kol adam, which Shabbos say is actually an incredible musr as well. Meaning, the beauty of Yiddishkeit is, people don't realize this, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu strongly encourages individuality, right? And wants each of us to cultivate our own unique identity. But interestingly enough, if it's too unique and without any framework, that's no longer an identity. That's batla daita itzal kol adam. Right? So batla daita itzal kol adam says there is a framework, and the framework actually is quite large. It's quite large, and you have to find your own space within that framework. But if you're totally outside of the framework, then that's not a shita, right? That's not a das. That's not a deya. And it's batla daita itzal kol adam. Incredible musar. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, "V'chol adam in chayav alav ela kishira." So remember again, the novelty in the Mishnah is that you could have two different shurim for two people. So if I go ahead and I store one kernel of wheat, right? So for me, one kernel is significant because I use it for a homeopathic remedy that I have, right? So for me, one kernel of wheat is chashuv. For you, you're only going to be chayiv hotzah if what? If you carry out the volume of a grogeres, of a dried fig's worth of wheat kernels. If you carry out less than that, you will be pater. So we'll say, so for me, because ultimately, again, I store it and I keep it, and it's chashuv for me, the shear is A, and for you, it's B. So we'll say, watch this. Naslisin de look Reb Shimon Elazar. So our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Reb Shimon Elazar. Why is that? The Sanya, Klal Amr Reb Shimon Elazar, Kol she'eno kasher lahatzniya, v'ein matzniyan kamohu. So let's listen to this. Reb Shimon Elazar says as follows: anything that is not fit to be stored, and people do not normally store this amount, v'hochsher lazeh v'itznio. But again, Ruvain will call them. Ruvain decides to store a smaller amount of this item. So we'll say, so again, let's just keep this easy. We're sticking with wheat kernels. People don't normally go ahead and store a wheat kernel. Okay, they store only a larger amount. But Ruvain decides that he's storing a wheat kernel. Fine, so as we've established, once Ruvain decides that a wheat kernel is significant for him, then Eina Chinami, again, that becomes the requisite shear for him. And if he carries out the wheat kernel, he's going to be chayiv. Shmuel Elazar says like this: V'hochsher lazeh v'itznio uba acher v'hotzi. And how about, so let's say Shimon comes along, and Shimon comes into Ruvain's house, and he takes Ruvain's wheat kernel, and he carries Ruvain's wheat kernel out. This chayiv zeh b'machshavto shel zeh. Ultimately, again, Shimon will be chayiv for hotzah based on Ruvain's machshava. So both say, Shimon ben Elazar ultimately goes ahead and says as follows: that once for Ruvain, that one wheat kernel is chashav, and therefore he stores it. Even if Shimon comes along and subsequently takes Ruvain's wheat kernel, Shimon will be chayiv for an act of hotzah based on Ruvain's machshava. So I'll say, since Ruvain made it chashuv, therefore Shimon will go ahead and be chayiv for transferring it out. Now, both say that stands in contradistinction to the Mishnah, because remember again, what did the Mishnah say? When Ruvain stores it, it becomes chashuv for who? For Ruvain, but not chashuv for anyone else. not chashiv for anyone else. So if Shimon, so according to the Mishnah, if Shimon were to come along and take the wheat kernel, Shimon would not be chayav because vis-a-vis Shimon, one wheat kernel is totally insignificant. So we'll say, so fascinating machlokus between the Tanakama, between the Rabbanon and Reb Shimon Elazar. What I just want to point out, both sides, what this really is a good old chakira, right? Of is this a din in the chefza or the gavra, right? Because I said, listen to this. Reading essentially according to Reb Shimon Elazar, it's a din in the chefza. Once it's a din in the object. Once Ruvain says that one kernel of wheat is chashiv, and again he doesn't just say it, but he acts on it. He stores it away. That changes the chefza. This kernel of wheat is now a davar chashiv. So even if Shimon comes along and he moves it, Shimon will be, or takes it out, Shimon will be chayiv. According to the Rabbanan, no. This is a din in the gavra, not a din in the chefza. This is a din in the individual. So Ruvain, vis-a-vis Ruvain, the object is chashiv. But again, that's only vis-a-vis Ruvain. For Shimon, this is one little wheat kernel. One wheat kernel by itself is totally insignificant. That's the machlokes. But the Gemara is just pointing out that our Mishnah clearly does not reflect the view of Reb Shimon Elazar. Amar Rava. Rava says as follows. Amar Rav Nachman, Hotzi kigro geres la'achila, v'nimlach aleh l'zriya. So what's the interesting case? What happens if you took out a dried fig? A dried fig. Then I will say, now watch the case over here. You took it out for achila purposes. So again, you transferred it from Rishus Hayochid to Rishus Harabim, and your intention is to eat it. Okay, now I will say, now remember again, the shear for normative consumption is, or I should say the shear for a food item is a grogeres. So in this case over here, you took out, in this case, you're literally taking out a dried fig. And your intention is to eat it, okay? And then let's say once you bring it out to the Rishus Harabim, you change your mind. I'm not going to eat it, I'm going to plant it. Inami, or lizriya v'nimlach aleh l'achila. Or you go ahead and you carry out the dried fig, and your intention when you carry it out is to plant it. But once you get into Rishus Harabim, your intention, you change your mind, you decide to eat it. So chayiv, you're still chayiv for otzah. So the Gemara says, well, that's obvious. Pshita. Zil hacha ikashur, v'zil hacha ikashur. So we'll say, of course you're going to be chayiv over here. Why? Because you carried out the shear, right? You carried out a dried fig, which is the shear. So we'll say, so whether you have intention to eat it or whether you have intention to plant it, either way, it doesn't really matter because you carried out the requisite shear. So watch this. The Gemara says, so what's the kasha? Ma'odetema, or what's the problem with the ma'odetema? But you know, akira v'hanacha b'chad machshav v'halaka. I might have thought that halacha l'maisa. Let's say this is very interesting. I might have thought that for otzah purposes, maybe I require akira and hanacha to be done for the same motivation. See what I'm saying? In this case over here, the akira, which means the uprooting of the object, was done with the intention in case A, to eat it, and then the hanacha and Rishus Harabim was done with the intention to plant it, or vice versa. So I might have thought that when akira and hanacha are done with two different intentions, maybe this is no longer a unified act of hotzah. Kamash malo, no. Kamash malo say that to a certain degree, but we don't really care. We don't really look at your intention. What we really look at is the object. Does the object have the requisite shear? And are you in fact transferring it from one domain to another? But if your mindset, i.e. what you wanted to do with the item, changes over time, that does not really seem to impact us too much. Boy, Rav, I suppose I follow up on that question. Hotzi chatzi grogeres lizriya. V'tavcha. We'll listen to this. V'nimlach aleh la'achila mahu. We'll say, let's say I carry out a dried fig. And then what happens? It swells up. So now it becomes the shear ultimately again of a grogeres of a full dried fig. And I have in mind to eat it. So we'll see here what's happening over here. When I took it out of my house, when I lifted it up, I took it out, my intention was to plant it. And ultimately, again, it was the size of a half a grogeres. Then I changed then it swells up, and I changed my mind, and my intention is to eat it. Mahu. What is the halacha in that case, Rabbi say? Remember again, in this case over here, by the time I have in mind to eat it, so it has the full shear. But yet, when I picked it up and moved it from my home, it did not have the requisite shear for achila, but it did have the requisite shear for zriya. So what do I do in this case? Mau. So maybe in the previous case that we just mentioned, even though you changed your intention from consumption to planting or vice versa, it didn't really matter to us. Why? Because the food item always had the requisite shear, and that's why you'll be chayiv. However, hacha kivan deba'ina da'afkalo hava bashir. Achilo lo mechayiv. But we'll say in this case over here, what did you carry out or what did you pick up? You picked up a half a grogeres. Well, that does not have the shear for achila. So maybe in this case over here, the akira was not done for the sake of achila, and therefore you shouldn't be chayiv. O dilma, or perhaps I should say, kevan de'ilu ishtik v'lo chashiv alea mechayiv amachshava dizriya. Or maybe Rabbi say on the flip side, had I not said anything, right, and changed my original intent, which was for planting, ultimately again, I would be chayiv, because remember again, I did move the requisite size for planting purposes. Hashnami nami chayiv. Therefore, again, I should also be chayiv. Vim tim salomar kevan deilu ishtik v'lo chashev aleh mechayiv amachshava dizriya. So we'll say, or maybe I should say as follows: since I did not go ahead, if I would have just not said anything and not had in mind, I would have been chayiv ultimately for transporting a half a grogeres amount, because that is an amount that is significant for zriya. Hashten nami mechayiv. Therefore, again, I should also be chayiv here. Therefore, hotzi. What about the flip case? Hotzi ki grogeres la'achila v'tzamka. We'll say, watch this case. What happens if I carried out a grogeres, a dried fig, and it shriveled. It shriveled, so that now it's less than the size of a dried fig. V'tzamka, v'nimla chalel is yes. We'll say, now watch this case. In this case, I took a regular grogeres and I transferred it for the purpose of consumption. Then before I placed it down, what happens? It shrivels up. Now it's less than a grogeres, and I have in mind that I'm going to use it for planting. So what happens in that case? Mahu. In this case over here, if I never changed my original intent, which was for consumption, I certainly would not be chayiv over here. Why? Because now I'm dealing with an item that is less than the shear for ochlin. It's less than a grogeres. Odoma, basar hashtazino mechayiv. Or ultimately, maybe we look at what my intention is now, and since my intention is now is for zriya, for planting purposes, therefore I should be chayiv. The Gemara says, if that's the case, hotzi grogeres la'achila. What about the following case? Hotzi grogeres la'achila. We'll say, watch this. Third case, I carry out a grogeres, which is a proper size. Okay, so meaning it's a size of a dried fig, and my intention is to carry it out for consumption purposes, which Rabbi said would make me chayiv. Watch this. V'tzamka, it shrivels. V'chazra v'tavcha, then it swells back up. So it's a full grogeres, shrivels up, and then again, what's the word? Not inflates, but it swells back up. Mahu. We'll say, what's the halach in that case? Yesh dichui le'inyan Shabbos, or ein dichui le'inyan Shabbos. So we'll say, in that case, what we ask over here is, halacha l'maisa, do we say that at the end of the day, once it swells up, it no longer has the shear of ochlin for a food item, and therefore even once it goes ahead and once it shrivels up, it no longer has the shear for ochlin, and therefore even subsequently once it swells back up, halacha l'maisi, you still won't be chayiv for it. We'll say that's what it means yesh dichui. We've seen this concept of dichui in many situations. Dichui means once something is set aside for non-use in a particular situation, do we say that it's essentially forever set aside for non-use? Right? That's it. Once it's set, once it kind of leaves the machana, it doesn't come back. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Yesh dichui mashechasra ben sayim ilu ancha bahi shaita lo mechayiv mi aminan toras dichui denit chelo mechayiv chatos ubatla la akira. So we'll say, essentially, do we say that once this grogeres was out of the parsha, out of the framework of the shear for ochlin, once you're out, you're out. That's what it means yesh dichui. Once you're out, once you're disqualified, you're disqualified. Even if your circumstances change, ultimately again you can't requalify. So do we say that therefore once the grogeres, once the fig shrivels up and no longer has the shear, therefore halacha l'maisa won't be chayiv for otza? To which the Gemara says, for all these cases, teku. So I say, interestingly enough, the Gemara is unsure what to do about these cases. So remember again, 3 different cases, but the common denominator is as follows. The truth is, there's 2 cases and then the third case. The third case I will say is, my intention doesn't change, but the object changes and then changes back. Right? So I'm transferring out a grogeres, which is the shear for achila. Right? I'm transferring out a grogeres, it shrivels and then swells back. So ultimately, again, do we say that this is an item for which I would be chayiv for transferring as a food item, or do we say once it's shriveled, it's out of the parsha and I'm no longer chayiv for otzah? In the first 2 cases, Rabbi say what happened over here is my mindset changed, and ultimately, again, the food item changed. And so the shaila is what happens in those circumstances where my mind, what I want to use the item for changes, and the item itself experiences a change as well. To which the Gemara says, Teku. We're not sure. We have to leave it for Eliyahu Hanavi. We don't know. Again, so we'll say, so for our purposes, meaning it will be usher, because if we're not sure what to do with it on Hilchos Shabbos, it's just usher. But Lamaisa, for example, for carbonic purposes, you would not bring a chatos under these circumstances. Good. So Rav is fine. Zara kizayis truma lebayis tamei. But say, what happens if a person throws a kizayis of truma? Remember again, trua, the portion of the kohen. Person throws the kizayis of truma into a home that is tamei. Now we'll say, obviously, if you go ahead and you throw truma, you put truma into a home, let's say where there's a corpse, so truma becomes tameya. So mahu, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, what's the halacha for what? L'mai. Ila inyan Shabbos kigro geres ba'inan. So we'll say, if you're talking about for Shabbos, that, let's say I'm standing in Rosh Hashanah, I'm holding truma, and I throw it into the home. So you're asking me, am I chayiv for otzah, for transferring an item from the public domain to the private domain? The shear for food items on Shabbos is not a kizayis, it's a larger amount of a grogeres, of the size of a dried fig. So I won't be chayiv for Shabbos. Ila inyan tuma kebeitza ochlin ba'inan. And I will say, if you're talking about for tuma, so remember again, the shear for tuma is an X volume. It's an X volume. So what do you mean when you say that you're chayiv? To which the Gemara says the olam Shabbos. The truth is, we're talking about for Shabbos purposes. Ukigom diika pachos mikebeitza ochlin v'hai mashlimo lekebeitza. So Rabbi says, listen to this. What's the case? The case is where there is less than a kabeitza of truma food inside of the home. And I throw in this truma, I have very good aim, and the truma that I throw in combines with the food that is already inside of the house to form a shir of a kabeitza. So so do we say that since when I throw in the food that I throw in combines with the food inside of the home for tumah purposes, the Rebbe say now all of this becomes truma tameya. So do I say that since it combines with the food ultimately for truma purposes, therefore what? Mechayiv nami le'inyan Shabbos, that ultimately again it combines for Shabbos purposes as well, and therefore I will be chayiv for otzah. O dilma kol le'inyan Shabbos kigro geres ba'inan. Or do we say no? The shear for Shabbos is not a beit, so the shear for Shabbos is a grogeres. So what do we say in this situation? Amrlei tinisua. So we'll say here the shaila. So the shaila over here is there's less than a kabeitza of food ultimately in the home that is tamei. I throw in, right? Let's say for our purposes, there's a quarter of a kabeitza of food ultimately inside of the home. I throw in 3/4 of a kabeitza of food into the truma tameya. The halacha is for tumah purposes. That 3/4 combines with the 1/4 to ultimately form a kabeitza of truma to become tamei in a home. So the shaila is, do we say that since it combines for tumah, it combines for Shabbos as well, or do we say no, that halacha l'maisa for Shabbos the shear is grogeres, and if you don't have grogeres, you're not going to be chayiv. Amrlei tinisui. So we learned this. Abashol Omer Shtei Alechem V'Lechem Apanim Shum Ki Grogeres. So we say that Shtei Alechem. Remember, Shtei Alechem is the offering of the 2 loaves that was offered up on Shavuos. Lechem Apanim is the showbread that was kept on the shulchan week in and week out. So the shear for Lechem Apanim and Shtei Alechem is Ki Grogeres. Is the size of a Grogeres. So we'll say what that sounds like it's saying is that Halacha L'Maisa. So we'll say, so just to be clear, a kibetza is less than a grogeres, right? A kibetza is less than a grogeres. So the shaila the Gemara is asking is as follows. Even though for Hilchos Shabbos I normally need a grogeres, but do we say that once the combined food item essentially is significant in one area of halacha, essentially the area of halacha being tumah, that'll automatically make it significant for Shabbos also? Or do we say no? Shabbos and tumah, two different things. Tumah needs a kibetza, and Shabbos needs a grogeres. And as much as now the combined kibetza becomes tumah, becomes tameh vis-a-vis truma purposes, ultimately, again, this is not considered to be a chashav unit for Shabbos purposes. Shabbos requires a grogeres and nothing less. So that's the shaila. So says the Gemara, for shtei alechem alechem apanim shinki grogeres. So the shear for lechem apanim and shtei alechem is a grogeres. So what it sounds like is, if you were to carry out lechem apanim or grogeres on Shabbos, you're only chayiv if halacha l'maisa you carry out a grogeres amount. Va'amai. Lema, why don't we say midila inyan amadays midila inyan yotze bekizayis le'inyan Shabbos nine bekizayis? We'll say, listen to this. There's a halacha that you are not permitted to take consecrated or sacrificial items outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Right? That's halacha, and I will say that halacha is a kizayis. So, for example, you can't take a kizayis of a carbon outside of the Beis Hamikdash. You can't take a kizayis of shtei lechem or lechem apanim. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. So why don't we say, if you're going to tell me that since in the case of the throwing the item, that since it forms a kabetza for truma purposes, that kabetza is significant for Shabbos purposes, why don't they say the same thing over here? Since by lechem apanim and shtei lechem, if you carry out the kizayis, you're going to be chayiv. So say also, since the kizayis is chashuv by the halachas of Yotzei, let kizayis also be chashuv by the halachas of Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, here's the difference. Hachi ashta hasami the afke chutz l'chomas hazara ifsale biyotzei as Shabbos lo mechayiv adematically the Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, here's the difference. By Yotzei, interestingly enough, you are chayiv for taking out the sacrificial item right after you take it out of the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. Yet you would not be chayiv for hotzah until you move something into the Rosh Hashanah, which is another way of saying that if you take out a kizayis of lechem apanim, I will say, you would be chayiv for yotzei, for taking something out of the temple precincts, way before you would become chayiv for Shabbos. You're chayiv for taking something out of the temple precincts, ultimately, again, once you leave the Beis Hamikdash. You won't be chayiv for Shabbos until you get to Rosh Hashanah. Hacha, in the case of the Truma Tameya case, Shabbos v'tuma bahadi hadadi ka'asyan. See, the say the reason why the Gemara is asking ultimately again in the Truma case is why? Because halacha l'maisa, the Truma and the Shabbos situation occur at the same time. Both say there's a simultaneity factor. Because remember again, what's happening over here? I'm standing in Rosh Hashanah. There's a home. I'm throwing. Remember what's the case? I'm throwing 3/4 of a kibetza of Truma into a home that is tameh. There's a quarter of a beitza in there already. I throw it. Good aim. The 3/4 of the kibetza combines together with the one kibetza inside the home. So I'll say, so what happens? Legabi tuma, there is now a kibetza of tameh, of truma inside the home, and therefore it becomes tameh. But halacha l'maisa, so remember, and what happened at the same time? The act of hotzah occurred at the same time as well. So that's where the Gemara has this shaila of simultaneity. That ultimately, again, do we say that halacha l'maisa? Do we say that halacha l'maisa ultimately, again, once it combines for Tumah purposes, it combines for Shabbos purposes as well, since they're both occurring at the same time or not? So the Gemara leaves it unresolved. The Minister will say, we will see this halakha is going to come up again. But for now, the Gemara leaves it unresolved. So in a case of simultaneity, where Tumah is occurring because you've created the share for Kibetza, can we say that even though Hilchos Shabbos normally requires a grogeres, but since the act of Hotzah is occurring at the same time as what? As the act of Tumah, then ultimately, again, they combine together. So I'll say, actually, I'll share with you the Rambam on this, which is actually quite interesting. So the Rambam writes, Halacha L'maisa as follows. The Rambam writes, this is in Perek Yud Ches, Halacha Chaf Zayin in Hilchos Shabbos. So I just shared this with you just very quickly. So the Rambam writes as follows. The Rambam says, Hotzi Kigro Geres Lachi, Lavitzam Kavach, Zorak kizayis ochlin lebayis tamei v'hishlim kizayis zel ochlin shayosha v'nasa kol kibetza Harez is suffix in this chayav al kizais and sheishna ashir the yintuma olon is chayav. So the Ram says it's a suffix. Suffix, which I will say seems to be the conclusion of the Gemara. So because it's a suffix, ultimately, again, obviously you would not bring a chatos, but halacha l'maisa, of course, it is to be avoided. Good. Weiter. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, excuse me. I'm sorry. says the Gemara, Chazir ve'echnisa enu chayv ala kishira. So let's remember again, this was the case of the Mishnah, where halacha l'maisa, again, you brought it out, and it was chashiv for you, but then ultimately, again, the item lost its chashivos, or your mindset changed. You're only chayiv if you go ahead and you bring it back, if you have the requisite shear. Pshita, it's obvious. What's the case? We'll say, what's the case? The case is where you threw the seed into the storehouse, and you know exactly where the seed is. What would you have thought? I might have thought that since its place is recognizable, therefore halacha l'maisa, its original designation remains. Kamash mola no. Since you threw it back into the storehouse, your original machshava is batal. So both said, therefore, again, quick illustration of this. For me, one kernel of wheat was significant. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, again, I was going to use it to go ahead and plant. But then what happened? I transferred out to Rosh Hashanah Chayiv. Now I'm going to transfer it back. Then I both say, now I'm no longer planting just one seed, right? I'm no longer doing this. What do? I throw this seed back into my storehouse. And I know exactly where that seed is. I might have thought that because the place of the seed is absolutely recognizable, therefore, again, its original identity is intact. Kamash Malon, once you throw it back into the silo, into the granary, your original machshava is batal. And therefore, again, this seed is just like every other seed, it will be governed no longer by your subjective shear, but by the objective shear. Beautiful, says the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah. Hamotzi ochlin. V'nasan ali sikufa. Say interesting case. I take out food and I put it on a isikufa. I will say we'll define what this means, but for our purposes right now, it means a threshold. So whether I placed it on the, let's say I took it from my house and placed it on the threshold. So whether I went ahead and brought it back from the threshold into my home, or someone else in the Rosh Hashanah came along and took it from the threshold into the Rosh Hashanah, potter. Ultimately, again, everyone's potter. Why? Because no one did a complete act of hotzah. Again, we will see what that means. Also remember, again, an act of hotzah requires an akira from one rishus and a hanacha in a separate rishus. So the Gemara says similarly, kupa shimalei peris. Person has a basket that's filled with fruit. V'nasna ala sikufa, and he placed it on the threshold. Hachitzona afa pishrav peros mibachutz. Even though the majority of the fruit. So we'll say the way this is working is the basket is situated on the threshold, but the threshold the basket extends into the Rosh Hashanah. Even though the majority of the fruit extend into the Rosh Hashanah, ultimately, again, pater, ad shahotzias kalakupa. I'm going to be pater until when? Until I take the entire kupa, the entire basket, into the Rosh Hashanah. So let's analyze. Says the Gemara, Hai isi kufa mai. So we'll say, here's what I know. The Mishnah told me that if I take, let's say, a basket and I place it on the threshold, and then I bring the basket back into my home, I'm pater. Or if I place the basket on the threshold, and someone from Rosh Hashanah comes along and takes the basket from the threshold, he is pater. So Rabbi say, so what is this threshold? So says the Gemara, Mai ilemis Rosh Hashanah pater hakamaf Rosh Hashanah. If you want to say the isikufa, the threshold has the status of Rosh Hashanah, then Rabbi say, if I place the basket there and subsequently bring it back, why would I not be chayiv? I'm taking from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. El isikufa Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, rather you have to say that what? Maybe the isikufa ultimately again is Rosh Hashanah. Well, if that's the case, bein shechazer v'otzian, bein sheotzian acher pater, hakam avik mirosh sarabim. I will say, if the isikufa ultimately again is going to be like a private domain, then if someone comes along from the Rosh Hashanah and takes the basket from the isikufa to Rosh Hashanah, why would he not be chayiv? That's an act of otzah. Ella isikufa karmelis. Rather, Rabbi says the Gemara, what is an isikufa? An isikufa is a karmelis. So we'll say, what is a karmelis? We know a karmelis is a rishus that resembles a rishus harabim, but is not really a rishus harabim. Midda oraisa, it is a rishus hayochid. But midrabanan, ultimately, again, well, I shouldn't say it, more often than not. Midorais it's Rosh Hashanah, but it has this different rabbinic kind of status. So the Gemara says, V'ha kamash malon taima denach bekarmelis, halo nach bekarmelis mechayiv. So we'll say, so therefore, what is the Mishnah teaching me? The Mishnah is teaching me, again, I'll say, this is Hotzah 101. What's Hotzah 101? In order to be chayiv for Hotzah, you must transfer something from one bona fide domain to another, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. If there is an intervening Carmelis, right? So I will say, if you place a Carmelis, it totally negates what occurs before it and what occurs after it. So therefore, if I'm in my house and I put the basket in on the Carmelis, on the Isikufa, that is not an act of Hotzah. And similarly, again, that's why if I take it back into my house, I'm not chayiv. Or if someone comes from Rosh Hashanah and takes the basket, they're not chayiv either. To which the Gemara says a very interesting message in the Ben Azai. Our Mishnah clearly does not reflect the view of Ben Azai, because what does Ben Azai say? Desanya moti mechonos leplatio derech stav chayiv Ben Azai poter. So we'll say, interestingly enough, just quickly, Ben Azai's shita ultimately is that even if something doesn't come to rest in a Carmelis, once you pass through a Carmelis, it is as if you have come to rest. So Rabbi say, our Mishnah clearly does not reflect that view. Our Mishnah holds that in order for something to be viewed as having come into rest in the Rosh Hashanah, what has to happen? It has to literally come to rest in the Rosh Hashanah. Not like Ben Azai who says that it would be enough if it simply passes through. Good, I'll say just a little bit weiter. Kuba Shimalea, Amr Chizkiya. So I'll say, so remember again, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says something quite fascinating, which is that halacha l'maaseh, if you have a basket that is filled with fruit and you put it on the threshold, even though the majority of the fruit hang into the Rosh Hashanah, hang over into Rosh Hashanah, ultimately, again, the basket is viewed as being at rest on the Isikufa. So Amar Chizkiya, Lo Shana Ela B'Kuba Mleya Kishurim V'Diluin. This is only true if the basket is filled with cucumbers and gourds, which Rabbi say ultimately are what? Are longer vegetables. Aval Mleya Chardal Chayiv. But ultimately, again, if it's filled with chardal, with mustard seed, then you will be chayiv. Now, I will say, so just, okay, I'm not going to get a chance to do this justice, but what I'll just tell you is this concept outside, and we'll have to begin with this piece in Mirza Hashem tomorrow. So we'll say, so what I just want to point out to you is really something fascinating. We're going to get into the fascinating discussion regarding igud kli shmei igud. I will say, does a basket somehow go ahead and keep all of the contents together as one cohesive unit, or ultimately are the individual contents of the basket reckoned on their own account? So I'll say the nafkamina is going to be, for example, if you have a basket filled with mustard seed. So I'll say if you have a basket filled with mustard seed, so if you could imagine, if part of that basket is sitting on the Isikufa and part of it extends into the Rosh Hashanah, so we'll say you have mustard seed that is fully in the Rosh Hashanah, right? Because the mustard seed are granules. You know, if you have, for example, larger fruit like gourds and cucumbers, so again, I will say that means part of that same vegetable is in Rosh Hashanah and part of it is in Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, but if you have, let's say, granular items, you can have all certain items that are fully in Rosh Hashanah, certain items that are fully in Rosh Hashanah. So the shaila is, does the fact that they're in the same utensil, does the utensil bond the items to make them into one cohesive unit, or do we look at the contents of the basket as individual entities? So also we'll have to cover that tomorrow evening. We'll stop over here. Yashakayach. Again, for those who, I'm sorry that we're ending a little bit further up on the daf, but for those who are joining us from the Shul Minyan on Zoom, you'll log out. We're going to close this Zoom chat now, and then we're going to restart it. Wishing everyone a beautiful day, a good Erev Shabbos, a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh. The Parsha Vart I'll post it on the WhatsApp chat, and it's already on the, I believe it's already on the podcast. Wishing everyone a